With the current market and stuff crashing, you know, crypto's down, stock market's down, presumably you're pretty thrilled that you are liquid right now. Like I think you, if I recall correctly, you're like out of everything right now, right? Like just sitting on, okay. So you timed that pretty well, obviously. So for you, being like future minded about what your overall vision is for acquisition.com, and knowing that your ROI for an investment on a $3 million annual revenue company or whatever is exponentially better than, at best, a 10% return on a good year in the stock market. Like, are you at a point where you're just like, fuck real estate, stock, crypto, none of it. I can just invest in myself in my own, like, you know, acquisition structure?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, sure, we own a few buildings and things like that, but acquisition.com is 100% the wealth vehicle. And it's, I mean, and you probably know this, it's just all the people that I see that are the wealthiest have found games where they can create unfair advantages. You know what I mean? Where they have something that's in their favor. And so, you know, the nice thing with acquisition.com is that we spent 12 to 18 months really thinking through how we wanted to build it, the structure, just everything to put into place. Whereas every other company up to this point has been a little bit more reactive. You know, it's been like, oh, this is what everybody wants, let's go make it, right? This one was like, what do we want? Because the people that are the wealthiest that I know have things that took them 20, 30, 40 years to build. And so I was like, well, if this thing's gonna be $1 billion plus, then it's gonna take time. You know what I mean? And we're not tech. So we're not gonna, you know what I mean? It's not gonna be, you know, a single tech explosion or some adoption of something. And so we have to be really methodical about how we approach it. And so it's probably gonna take 10 years or 20 years, which means that I and Layla both have to enjoy it. It has to be something that we find meaningful, and that we are excited to do every day, and that we continue to feel challenged and stimulated from. Because the other thing is, I know that I can do any business for 3 to 5 years, but I know at that point I start to get itchy, which my track record shows. I start to get itchy, and so with this business, part of the reason we designed it this way is that I can go all in on these businesses, get exposed to different industries, and if I want to say, let's say, I see an opportunity in sales recruiting, whatever. I can say, instead of me starting a sales academy, I can say, well, why don't I go find a sales academy that I think's awesome and then get exposure to that opportunity. And so that way I can do all the stuff that I want to do and help that company kind of execute those things. And then that way I still stay focused on my main thing, which is acquisition.com, without being distracted, but I get to participate in kind of some of the upside.
And when you go for minority stake, like, obviously this varies on situation to situation, but is there like a minimum amount of equity you look for to have enough skin in the game for it to be worthwhile?
Yeah. So it's a really good question. By the way, I'm loving this interview, by the way, just letting you know. This is great. I love to talk about this stuff. So it has to be enough that we care, but it can't be so much that they stop caring. So that's the balance. There's like a fine line there, right? And so we found that to be like 20 to 30%. Is enough that we're meaningfully invested, and the founder is still meaningfully vested in the outcome. So everybody is just charging full on, towards the goal.
Okay, and
that's been our sweet spot.
I feel like I probably know the answer because you have enough of an infrastructure team-wise to kind of like carry out the objectives you have, seemingly. But is there, like, you have 8 companies under you right now? Is there like some capacity limit where, and obviously you haven't got there, so maybe you can't put like a hard stop on this, but is there like a breaking point where it's like, holy shit, we need more team to support the amount of companies we want to have under us right now? Like,
for sure. Yeah, we run a pod structure. So, you know, we'll have a handful of people who are specialists over a specific pod.
Because even if you're doing a weekly meeting with each one and you've like really, really dialed it in to a point where you're like super just basic oversight mode of them, I feel like that still adds up to where you're like in a monthly oversight meeting with like 20 companies or something. It's like you're doing a big fucking meeting like every day to a point where you have no idea what's going on with anything essentially.
Well, it depends on what the type of the meeting is, right? And so if it's, you know, if we have a cadence to check in on how they're doing on a playbook, I'm not required for that. Like, the playbook's documented, this is what we need to implement, here are the ads to get the person in place, to run this play, et cetera, right? from a monthly perspective, me reviewing the numbers, we already cleaned the data on our side so that we can see it, just the key numbers that we care about. Because at the end of the day, I'm sure like when you read financials for your own companies, like I'm not looking at everything. I'm looking at the handful of things that matter to me.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at net free cash flow. I'm looking at growth. I'm looking at sales units. I'm looking at conversion numbers, and that's about it. You know what I mean? And you know, the churn is kind of factors in for all the customer lifetime value stuff. In terms of, to circle back to the original question, which is like, is there a cap? There is a cap for the current capacity, but right now we have more employees than we have portfolio companies, for context. So this isn't like, but again, this is a type of business model where like, for example, APG, American Pacific Group, who's the private equity fund that purchased majority shares in Jim Lunch and Prestige, I think they have like 13 people. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And so it's, you know, Berkshire Hathaway has 19 employees, and they have 500,000 employees through their portfolio companies or whatever it is, some enormous number. And so I talk a lot about leverage, but like finding opportunities where your inputs have the discrepancy between inputs and outputs is high. And so, in this business, the goal when we were structuring it was like, how can we provide tremendous value to companies without being limited in that way, like you were saying.
Yeah.
And so that was the goal. But for us, because of the nature of how our things work, we can attract talent that they cannot attract. We can have people work on their company that they would never have access to. And in that way, the only people who'd get access to those things would be funded companies. And so in a lot of ways, we're able to give entrepreneurs who are bootstrapped an advantage that they would never normally have. They would never have access to this level of talent to help them grow their company. And then in so doing, get such a huge multiple on the equity appreciation that happens from what, when they start with us, is usually valueless. And I don't say that as a slight, but more so just the reality is that if you have a personality-driven brand and you're doing $3 million a year, $1 million in cash flow, like there's not a lot of people who are going to want to buy that from you and let you walk away. Like it's just, the buyer market is minuscule. Now, if in 5 years it's doing 30 million top line, 10 or 12 million in EBITDA, and you're completely removed from the face of the business and it's really become Hairstyle Academy rather than, Sarah Lee's hairstyle, secrets or whatever, that does have enterprise value. And that absolutely can be sold for 50, 80, $100 million. And so for us, it's like that equity appreciation for the founder, it would be unlikely that they would get that kind of personal wealth increase without having just tons of experience doing it. And we can just shorten the curve.